Morning everybody, here we go with Friday, first few chapters. I wonder what his next set of parents are going to be like. Chapter 1. Oh dear, said the head. Is everything all right now? Yes, said Barry. Lord Radawilloff gave them some money for a new tent and said they could stay on his land for as long as they liked. Oh well, that's good. And he even got Peevish to bring down a big hose to the field to wash off all the sick. The head looked a little queasy at this. Couldn't they just have jumped in the sea? Said Secretary 1. I'm not sure all those chemicals would be good for the environment, said Secretary 2. Yes, well, let's not talk about it any more, said the head, who had turned a strange shade of green. So, Barry, you've got one more go at it. He turned over the last 24-hour glass, the red one. Better make it count, he said. Barry wanted to ask why. What happens if it doesn't work out with the next set of parents either? But he knew that no one would answer his question. They would just mutter darkly and change the subject, which meant all Barry knew was that what would happen was probably really, really bad. He took out, for the last time, his list. It was extremely crumpled by now. He scanned it quickly. He knew it very well, having read it, it seemed, 1,000,000 times since he'd been in this world. Being boring, tick. Not being famous, tick. Being poor, tick. Not letting him play video games. Well, he hadn't done that one, but he didn't think it was enough to say, parents who will let me play video games. That should have been the Cools with their whole let him do anything attitude, but they didn't have any video games or any electricity. And then he saw it, marked as if to remind him by a little splash of Rainbow Sick. Number 7. Being always much nicer to TSE than me. I'd like to try out parents where I'm the favourite child, please. Write that down, Secretary 2, said Secretary 1. I'm writing it down, Secretary 1, said Secretary 2, her pad already flipped over and halfway through writing the word favourite, F-A-V-O-U, she'd written so far. Okay, said the head, opening his laptop. So we're back to parents with other children then, because there's not much point in being the favourite if you're the only child, eh? Write that down as well, said Secretary 1. I'm writing it down, said Secretary 2, furiously scribbling the words, other children. While they were doing that, Barry had a thought. Number 7 was on his list because of the way he felt things were in his family, because of the way his parents were when it came to him and his sisters. Now, the secretary entity weren't exactly the sisterly entity, but they were pretty close, and so Barry said, Actually, what about... He gestured with his head to the left. What? Said the head. He looked over. Well, that's not a bad idea. Secretaries? They both stopped writing and looked up. You'll be all right if Barry spends his last day with your parents, won't you? Both of them looked at him open-mouthed. Neither of them wrote down the words, our parents. Chapter 2. On the way to the secretary entity's house, they walked there, as it was only round the corner from the parent agency. The two girls were clearly cross with Barry. Well, Barry, I mean, I understand why you might want this, but I really think, one of them was saying, and I think too, said the other one, that you've chosen the wrong parents. Yes, our parents, Marjorie and Malcolm Bustle, yes, Marjorie and Malcolm Bustle, they are very solicitous with us. Solicitous means caring, looking after, not neglecting. Barry nodded as if he'd known that. He hadn't. I mean, for example, every time our daddy, Malcolm Bustle, yes, Malcolm Bustle, every time he sees us, he picks us up, whirls us round and gives us a kiss. Yes, he does. Barry nodded again. So I just can't see any way that they're going to fulfill your requirements in this particular case. No, I don't see it either. Perhaps the head should have suggested some other ones. Yes, perhaps he should. By now, they were at the secretary entity's house. It was a nice-looking house, considerably nicer than the one the sisterly entity lived in, thought Barry. He looked around. The road it faced was leafy and quiet, with no sign of any big trucks making the houses shake. Secretary 1 pressed on the button to the side of the front door. Hello, said a voice. Dad, said Secretary 1. It's us, said Secretary 2. A man, who looked a bit like one of the secretary entity, only much taller and older and male, opened the door. The secretary entity drew themselves up to their full height, ready to be picked up, whirled about, and kissed. Barry! Hello, Barry! We're so pleased to see you, Barry, said Malcolm Bustle, picking him up, whirling him round, and giving him a kiss on the cheek. Barry, 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 said Marjorie Bustle, who looked like the Secretary Entity too, only taller and older and female, appearing behind her husband and opening her arms wide, and adding one more Barry, just in case. Nice to meet you, Malcolm and Marjorie, said Barry, as Malcolm set him down. Hello, Mum, said Secretary 1. Hello, Dad, said Secretary 2. Do come in, Barry, said Malcolm. Barry went through the door, which Marjorie then shut, leaving the Secretary Entity on the doorstep. So, Barry, said Marjorie, lovely to meet you. There was a tap-tap-tap noise from behind them. They looked round. The letterbox was flapping up and down. Then it flapped up and stayed there. Barry could just about see 2 pairs of little girl eyes peeping through the slot. Mum? Dad? You seem to, have locked us out. Accidentally, of course. Oh, yes, of course. Barry, said Marjorie. Sorry to bother you, but can you hear a noise? Said Barry. You mean a kind of annoying buzzing sound, like some trapped flies? Yes, said Malcolm. Oh, said Barry. I think it might be these 2. He opened the door again. The Secretary Entity was standing on the doorstep, smiling and waving. Hi, Mum. Hi, Dad. Malcolm and Marjorie didn't say anything in reply. Chapter 3. Barry looked round the Bustle's living room. He had been expecting it, what with the Secretary Entity being a version of the sisterly entity, to be more like his own living room at home. At home, his family did their weekly shop at Morrison's, but on their way to it they passed Waitrose. Barry would see parents in there shopping with their children. He didn't know any of those children, and hadn't been in any of their living rooms, but he imagined that, if they had, they would look like this one. The smell like it, of fresh bread and coffee, and sound like it in the background. He could hear a serious voice on the radio discussing the glass ceiling in the banking sector, whatever that was. The floor was wooden and polished. There was a fireplace with a rug in front of it. At the other end of the living room, it became a kitchen. On the walls, there were some modern art paintings and also lots of certificates won by the Secretary Entity. Best dressed, best spoken, and, there were loads of these, best handwriting. Also, on the walls were 4 big canvas pictures of the Secretary Entity, from when they were babies to now, but Malcolm was presently taking those down and putting up 4 big canvas pictures of Barry. I hope you like these, he was saying. The girls came in, frowning hard at their father. I had them made up from a photo they sent from the agency. He stepped back to look at the pictures. All the same photograph, of course, but I tinted them with different colours. What do you think? Lovely, said Barry. What have you done to our Mum and Dad? Hissed Secretary Entity 1 to Barry. Oh, said Barry quietly. Not much. How much is not much? Said Secretary 2, also hissing. Just asked the head to have a little word with your parents before we got here, explaining how I'd like it all to work, if they wanted me to choose them in the end. The Secretary Entity looked at each other open-mouthed. Then Secretary Entity 1 turned to Barry and said, I can't believe our beloved mother and father are actually going along with such a disgust... Barry, called Marjorie from the kitchen bit of the room. What would you like for lunch? Said Barry. Pizza? Oh, well, you've made a mistake there, said Secretary Entity 1 smugly. We only ever eat gluten-free, free-range, nut-free, free-for-me numbers, salt and sugar-free food. Yes, our food is very, very free, said Secretary Entity 2. Except, of course, it costs a lot of money. But we never, ever, ever eat junk food. Yes, our parents would simply never allow it. So, said Marjorie, coming out from the kitchen, holding a takeaway menu from somewhere called Pizza Shed. What would you like? 10 cheese? Crispy hottie, Latino, old and new, salty bananas, 50 fish, German, meat, string, nobody likes this one, eggy Norman. What's eggy Norman? Mozzarella, bacon, tuna, pickled cucumbers, tomatoes, pineapple, and then, in the middle, a hard-boiled egg carved into the shape of a small man called Norman. I'll have a 10 cheese, said Barry after a moment's thought. I'll call them straight away, said Marjorie, picking up the phone. Mum, said Secretary 1. What? Said Marjorie. I love pizza. What do you love about it? Said Secretary 2. Marjorie looked a little uncomfortable. The cheese, and the grease, and the salt, and the big fatty bread. She stared at the menu for quite a long time. Yum, she said eventually, very quietly. But, said Secretary 1, what are we going to have? Pizza, of course, said Barry. Marjorie looked at him. He held her gaze. She seemed to sigh, then looked at the secretary entity. If it's good enough for Barry, it's good enough for you. You don't have to order them anything, said Barry. They can have my bits of crust. I don't eat those. Perfect, said Marjorie, dialing the number for Pizza Shed. The secretary entity looked on, amazed. Malcolm appeared, coming down the stairs. Do you have any video games? Said Barry. Malcolm frowned and went back up. No, screamed Secretary Entity 1. Of course we don't. We only watch educational and improving television, screamed Secretary 2. So don't expect any of that rubbish here. I'm afraid... Yes, Barry. I think I've got everything you wanted. They turned round to see Malcolm coming downstairs again, his arms overflowing with small boxes. I've already set up the TV with a flea and a Y box. And you can play any of these. Spanky's Quest, Ninja Zebra, Space Pitch and Putt, Find the Fat Tongue, Zombie Crash 3, Death in the Car, The Game, Monkey Sticks, Boxers vs. Spear Throwers, Cyborg 2014, 7 Second Soccer Sevens, Marble Man, Stinky Pirate Revenge. I think Stinky Pirate Revenge only works on the flea, said Barry, looking at the cover. Right, okay, I'll bear that in mind, said Malcolm. So, TV on? Dad, we want to watch Master Brain. Yes, and University Big Clevers, and Come Read With Me. Malcolm glanced at Barry, and also, like Marjorie had before, he seemed to sigh. Yes, well, you can watch them another day. He went over to the TV and switched the game console on. For now, Barry, fill your boots. Barry looked at his shoes. Then he remembered what that expression meant. Thanks, he said, sitting down with the flea control. On the TV, a cartoon pirate appeared, covered in what appeared to be bits of old food. "Who are me hearties? I am Smelly Beard, terror of the seven seas," he said. "Think ye I whiff? Well then," he drew his curved sword, "I shall have me revenge." Thanks, Dad, suggested Malcolm tentatively. Maybe, said Barry, pressing the buttons on the control expertly. So there we are, first 3 chapters of Friday. Tomorrow we'll have the last 2, and then we'll find out what happens. See you tomorrow.